would love nothing more than to just rescue animals from places of abuse. But in this capitalist-driven society, just because animals go missing does not mean that they're not going to be replaced. All that a researcher has to do is get on the phone to Charles River and order some more research animals, and they'll be there within a week. So it was because of that that we started employing arson.
I do believe in the here and now that animals must be rescued, must, have their pain alleviated. I mean, if, for example, there was, an adult abusing a child, we would remove that child. We wouldn't accept any reasons or excuses for that. And I just use the same theory, the same tactic to animals. In my view, laws are not set in stone, and laws throughout the decades have been altered by public consensus, public protest, and I don't believe that you can ever challenge a law without the use of direct action. In the mid-1990s, I was part of an operation against an abattoir, a slaughterhouse in the west side of the country, which involved firebombing of 12 vehicles, including delivery vans and individual cars. We also broke into the abattoir itself and set fire to the interior of the premises. And I was arrested and charged and imprisoned for that offence. If you're doing arson, you have to be very careful to minimise all the risks associated. Preparation and reconnaissance took us about a month and a half, 2 months. A lot of surveillance had to be done on the place to ascertain there'd be no humans or animals in the area.
It's very easy to prevent human fatalities from carrying out direct action.
So we checked the interior and exterior doors, the roofs, possible places of entry and exit.
For every direct action that has ever been taken, there are probably half a dozen that were not taken because of the threat to human or animal life. We deliberately created fuses that would ignite while we were still there, so we had an element of control over the situation before we left. In this case, the implications of actually rescuing farm animals is immense, simply because of where to put them, if nothing else. But if you close the slaughterhouse down, and you would do for a few months at least, and their premiums shoot up through the roof, and so it becomes much more of an expensive business. So the profit they're making from killing animals in the first place can either be tempered or sometimes countered by economic sabotage. So the money they're making from animals is no longer cost effective. So in that respect, damage was done, and so I consider that a successful operation.
You have to ask yourself, why are some of these groups going to these extremes? And I think in general, when you feel as an individual that you can't get your message out, that nobody's listening, that you're not treated with any seriousness when you raise an issue, you're going to get frustrated. And that frustration is going to lead to something else.
Repeatedly in the last 20 years, I've seen coverage of environmental issues and animal abuse issues only because somebody broke the law and expose them.
A lot of the high-profile campaigns, certainly from the 80s onwards, were born as a result of the animal rights direct action movement, whereby the ALF, for example, broke into laboratories and brought out footage and documents and brought it to the public attention.
The media owes it to American citizens to show them what is really going on in the laboratories. If there's nothing wrong with it, why is it so hard to get the images on camera? Why is it so impossible to show these images in mainstream television? If there's nothing wrong with it, what are they hiding?
When you drive by UCLA or Cedars-Sinai, those pretty walls there and the lawns, behind that, the horrors do take place.
It's very interesting when you arrive at any facility or a particular location where animals are being exploited for any reason, whether it's in entertainment or for the production of Premarin or for food or testing, people are immediately suspicious when a new person arrives. And they generally do question. I was certainly asked when I worked in a laboratory if I was an animal rights activist, and it actually came out more like a statement. We know you're an animal rights activist. And I think that's just commonplace. People know that they have to be careful in letting their little dirty secret out because people are watching. To obtain a position in any given field as an investigator, the easiest course is always the best, and there's no need to fabricate information on a resume, at least in my experience. I omitted that I worked for PETA, certainly, because nobody's going to be letting PETA come in the door. I believe my title was an associate technician when I was hired, and I had access to all the animals in the lab for the most part, and did a lot of cage cleaning, and it really didn't take very long before I was helping to hold the animals for dosing and restrain them for some of the more painful, terrible procedures.
Do you want to grab the front end and I'll grab the back end? That's what we did yesterday.
Testing methods are sort of confined to a handful of well-known tests. Oral gavage, where a tube is shoved down a throat. Nasal gastral, where the tube is shoved up into the nose. And the dermabrasion test is applied on top of the animal's skin after it's been shaved and abraded. Substances can be put into the eyes, up the rectum, into the vagina, injected intravenously, and inhaled. And some of the worst tests to see are soft, fluffy little white rats that are shoved into containers the size of a hairspray can, and they're left just hanging there, sometimes for more than a day, inhaling some toxic substance.
I used to inspect laboratories for the government in the United States, and I can tell anyone who has any doubts at all that in some of the best laboratories I went into, I found beagles with their intestines on the floor left overnight when a surgical wound had become open. I found animals who had puppies stuck in their birth canal and had been left there to die. I found chimpanzees, infants, kept in cages so small that they couldn't even extend their arms over their heads. And those were in whitewashed, walled rooms with not a thing for them ever to see or do. So I also know, because I have spoken to so many scientists, so many researchers, so many physicians, that animal research is just a big business. And that unless you tap someone on the shoulder and say, look lad, you've been doing this for 14 years, you haven't discovered anything, time to look at something more modern and up to date than force feeding an animal, they'll carry right on doing it.
Some of the substances that we were dosing animals with had name brands written on them already. We all knew a bunch of people who were already taking these products and drugs and had been for a number of years. So what's up with the animal testing going on now when we have people that are already taking these drugs? While there were so many animals that I wish that I could have gotten out that I really got close to during my 8 months there, if I could have saved anybody, boy, I wish I could have saved James. James was a primate that was so unlike the other primates in a lot of respects. The animals, the primates that are there, some are bred either nationally or internationally, and some are actually still wild caught. He came from China through a broker in North Carolina, ended up at the lab, and immediately the first time I met him when I went in to clean, I knew he was different than all the other primates. He just really connected with me, and I connected with him. And I remember that day feeling, when I left work that day, like I finally had a friend in the laboratory, which probably sounds corny on some levels, but the other primates are obviously terrified. And James was too, but the other primates would run to the back of the cage and shriek and try to get away from people. And as soon as I just gave James a few seconds of my attention outside of his cage, he just reached out for me right away. It was as if he was really accustomed to people. Over the course of the next several weeks, I really spent a lot of time, as much as I could, with a busy workday with him, and he would eat orange pieces out of my hands, and on more than one occasion when I was kneeling in front of him, he would reach out and start grooming my eyebrows and sort of tugging out the bonnet over my hair because he wanted to, you know, perform what his species perform, which is the natural grooming of family members. His behavior changed so radically when the testing started, when he was first acclimated to the ECG ward. He became much more submissive and fearful, and as the weeks progressed, it was harder and harder to get him to even focus on me. He would be sort of scattered and looking around at different things, because certainly I was a person that compromised his trust after that point. I looked like every other technician who came in and did terrible things to him. But when I see him, it is striking to me how profound this relationship was with this little guy. And while there were so many animals that I wish I could have gotten out,
My name is Dr. Jerry Vlasic, and I'm a trauma surgeon working in the Los Angeles area. My job is to take care of patients that come into a major trauma center that have been injured, maybe in a major car accident, or perhaps have been shot or stabbed. As a physician practicing on the front lines in the trauma centers of Los Angeles, I can tell you that I see a lot of suffering every day. I see people suffering from their injuries, I see people suffering from diseases, and it makes me more acutely aware of other suffering because animals suffer very much like human beings do. That said, I did do animal research for a year, experimented primarily on dogs. Our project was to try to develop an example of hardening of the arteries in dogs. All of our efforts to produce hardening of the arteries in dogs were frustrated because dogs are carnivores and they don't get hardening of the arteries like human beings do. We would feed the dogs pure cholesterol, and then we would scrape up the inside of their arteries and try to give them hardening of the arteries, and it just never happened. As far as I know, it hasn't ever been done today. So that was basically a year of laboratory research in my mind that was wasted. The vast majority of all animal research is never, ever useful for treating human health issues. Will never be useful because it simply doesn't apply. The physiology is so different in animals from human beings.
I haven't got the patience today, I really haven't.
Now settle down.
Oh, shut up. I shouldn't sit back too far, it's just under that.
We always used to joke about the fact that, what are we doing with these animal studies? I mean, why are we studying animals? I mean, this doesn't tell us anything about what's going on with human beings. So there was always kind of a feeling that anyone that was doing an animal study was really sort of not really making a contribution. It was a way of maybe making a living, but it really wasn't something that we would use. I mean, I would never take a study that was done on animals and use that information to treat a patient.
No matter how many rats and mice and rabbits and dogs and non-human primates a drug is given to, ultimately it's given to that first human being. And we know that we can't really extrapolate the results from non-human animals into human animals, so whoever the first human is that takes that drug really is a human guinea pig.
I don't know any doctor that ever used, any practicing doctor that ever used information that came out of an animal study to do anything, or would use that to justify anything that he did with a patient.
In the 21st century, we have much more modern and efficacious techniques for testing drugs and for doing other medical research.
Oh, shut up. wet. I shouldn't sit back too far. He's pissed everywhere. You've had your shot. Fucking sit still.
It's ridiculous to think that we're depending upon a research method, that is animal research, that might have been useful in the 1800s maybe when we were still elucidating how blood circulated. But in this day and age, we're looking at things on the molecular level and on the subatomic levels. And to think that we can do that in a mouse or a rat and then apply that to a human being is ridiculous. It just doesn't work. Major research facilities like City of Hope and Cedars-Sinai and UCLA are considered the center of medical research because of a massive public relations campaign and massive amounts of money that are pumped into these hospitals and medical centers by pharmaceutical companies and with research grants. It turns out that when a researcher applies for a grant, and all researchers apply for grants because that's the only way they can stay in their positions, when they apply for a grant from, say, the National Institute of Health, for instance, that money comes in, half that money goes straight into the hospital. They can use that to pay the janitors, they can use that to pay the rent, they can use that money any way they want to. Then the other half goes to the researcher for actual animal research or non-animal research. But unfortunately, the National Institutes of Health and other research funding organizations tend to lean towards giving more money for animal research because it produces more data and they get more publications. And they're interested in protecting themselves in a legal arena by saying, well, you know, we tested this on rabbits and dogs and cows or anything else they want to test it on, and therefore we shouldn't be held responsible when it turns out to, lo and behold, produce heart attacks in human beings like that drug Vioxx did.
Let me explain something about the City of Hope. It's the golden temple of cancer research. I lost my mother to cancer, my mother's husband, whom I absolutely adored. I lost a lot of good friends to cancer. But what they're doing there, if I took anybody from the public into this facility and you saw what they were doing to these animals, because I was the lay public at one time when I first went into these research facilities. If you looked at it, there is no way in your mind you could justify that and call it science. It's not science, it's insanity.
Ruthless, I think, is the word.
When I interviewed Bill Maher for the TV show Celebrity Justice, I learned he was a free thinker who doesn't have any fear of making controversial remarks. So he takes on issues that other people in the media are afraid to take on. And he has taken on this issue of experimentation going on at Columbia University that he says is a perfect example of unnecessary and hideously cruel animal experimentation.
Some of these experiments are having to do with finding out, you know, how bad nicotine is for you. You know, like we need to do that.
I think beagles are a common choice for animal testing because beagles are generally friendly, they're a small breed, they don't take up a lot of room, and it's really unfortunate because if you think of all the breeds of dogs, who would rather be out running around in the sunshine and sniffing grass and trees and playing than a beagle?
We had bought some ads on K-Rock and, you know, 3 or 4 companies, pharmaceutical companies, had called them and said, these people are terrorists, you have to pull the ads. And they ended up pulling the ads for the show. I never really thought about the whole thing until I've gotten into it and realizing how important money is for everything, for advertisements. And obviously we can't show any of this stuff on TV, you know, because, you know, every other commercial's for fast food or for some kind of, for the meat industry or for some new, you know, anti-allergy pill or fucking Viagra or whatever.
I don't know yet of anyone who's died from PMS. I know some people have had PMS who've killed some people, but that's different. So to me, that's a particularly weak case to be making for the torturing of little creatures.
I'm not an advocate of anything illegal. I can only, as a journalist, look at the social forces that might contribute to this kind of behavior. And I see that when the mainstream media refuses to show the images of what's going on inside laboratories and factory farms, it creates a social condition that could lead some people to extreme behavior.
every year, a score of 1 billion animals die so we can eat their dead bodies, so we can enjoy them jumping through hoops of fire and riding toy bicycles, so we can skin them and wear them, and because our palate is trained to crave their flesh, that all we need to do is be ever so polite and patient and just practice politics. And change will come when that's never happened in any other social justice movement, hands down, in the history of the world.
Throughout our history, there have always been those who have petitioned the government and wrote letters to legislators and politicians. There have even been those who have written bills and had discussions with the leaders of the nations. These tactics alone have never worked. The only time we have seen a social justice movement prevail has been because there was pressure from more radical factions. On the night of December 16, 1773, a group of people led by Samuel Adams and Paul Revere disguised themselves as Native Americans and boarded ships containing detained tea. They threw the tea into the harbor in protest against taxation. Adams and Revere were labeled terrorists by some and heroes by others. The suffragettes would chain themselves to railings, setting fire to the contents of mailboxes and smashing windows. The suffragettes evolved into the modern-day women's liberation movement, and is the reason women are now allowed to vote and no longer considered pieces of property. In the history of the world, what all of our social justice movements have in common is that they have faced government and community repression, including arrest, imprisonment, FBI and CIA investigations. They also share the commonality of having different factions within those movements. The most compelling example being the civil rights movement, wherein we had a leader advocating illegal activity in a peaceful manner, including nonviolent direct action and civil disobedience. But we also had another leader who advocated violence and absolute abolition at all costs. It was during this passionate time in our history that the President, John F. Kennedy, stated publicly, "Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable." In 1960, Nelson Mandela led an organized guerrilla warfare against the white government in response to a group of peaceful demonstrators being massacred. In 1964, Mandela was convicted of sabotage and sentenced to life in prison. However, he was released in 1990. He was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993. In 1994, Mandela was elected President of South Africa. A man once labeled a terrorist is now considered a freedom fighter.
I recognize that the things that I believe in very likely might take me away from being a father, from being with my son again, and I might have to go back to jail, I might be killed. But that is part of being a warrior.
If breaking the law and going to prison has to be a part of that process, then it's something you have to prepare for. As with all people fighting for a liberation struggle or for social change, you have to accept that it's part of that process, that is our job, that is our task.
I mean, Martin Luther King said all that, you know, that you got to expect it, you know. It's a sign of how effective you're becoming, you know.
Like the women's movement, like those who fought against slavery, what we've done is we've made this movement, this animal liberation ethic, now become a part of mainstream society, and that's impossible to imagine that could have happened without organisations like the Animal Liberation Front and others who use direct action.
And the system ain't going to sit back and let us do it, so they are going to demonise us. There's that saying, isn't there? First they'll ridicule you, then they'll attack you, and then only after that they'll accept you. We're the same people. This is the Animal Liberation Movement. We're about love and compassion. We've got an anger, we've got an edge. But you read about us now, and they want to, you know, they're starting to more and more and more and more, they're starting to call us terrorists.
You post on a website, or you say in a public lecture that you defend the Animal Liberation Front, that you support direct action, you are now considered to be an advocate and a voice for terrorism.
I've not done anything but have a goddamn website and a newsletter. Speech. I get 23 years in jail, possibly.
My girlfriend come back from Germany yesterday. They went to a fur demo, and on the way back they got pulled in and they were held under the Terrorism Act for 5 hours.
Let's applaud the FBI. Yay, cheer that. To cheer that is just like to spit and piss on the grave of Martin Luther King.
Throughout my years as an animal rights attorney, I've had the opportunity to meet several fabulous activists. I have met Kevin Jonas, who is the former president of SHAC, Stop Huntingdon Animal Cruelty. And I've actually represented SHAC on a few cases. I'm representing them now on a case. Kevin Jonas and other people are being federally indicted on charges coming out of the Animal Enterprise Protection Act. This is the first time anyone's been indicted under that federal act, claiming that these people are involved in a conspiracy. Recently, some FBI files were unsealed, and I was privy to them as an attorney and read that I have been investigated by the FBI since 2001. Here is the affidavit, one of them, starting November 15, 2002, wiretapping. And this has everyone listed. I'm someone who is listed as a potential interceptor violator. Here's where they say that my toll records were reviewed on my telephone, that my trash has been searched since 2001. Here it says that I've been placed under physical surveillance several times in Los Angeles. It discusses that I have been seen with other people during non-Title III consensual recordings. This is the National Crime Information Center, stating that there's a warning that I'm a terrorist organization member, animal rights extremist, although no prior criminal history.
We got a tip at Celebrity Justice, a nationally syndicated show, that this rock star, John Feldman, had his house raided by the FBI and local law enforcement in Los Angeles. So we interviewed him.
We were doing a home demonstration at this guy's house, who was running the shelters, the Los Angeles shelters at the time, who were killing something like 10,000 animals a month here and not educating people about spaying and neutering and not doing the right thing, just doing the cheaper thing. Save money, kill animals. We're protesting his house. I think some of the neighbors had written down license plate numbers. So because we were there, our car was parked in the street and we were doing this legal demonstration, they'd written down our license plate number, and a week later, the Animal Liberation Front had spray painted something on his driveway, and essentially his house got graffitied. But because of the whole, kind of the way things are now with this eco-terrorism or, the whole Patriot Act, they got a search warrant first thing in the morning. A judge signed it off just because they had a license plate number. I was, a suspect. But not only, they didn't just come to the house to just say, hey, were you there asking questions? They had a search warrant, and they're saying, if you don't open the door, we're gonna break it through with a battering ram, which they showed me. I got home from the gym, I'm sweating from, cardio or whatever, and, next thing I know, there's 12, 14, SUVs, unmarked vehicles, 2 cops kind of get out of the car, guns drawn, put your hands on your head, get out of the car. I see this helicopter come, from behind, just like some crazy, like a Bruce